This is the Ideas Podcast, the show where instructional designers discuss ideas over a nice cup of tea. This week, I talk teaching and ID with Natalie Friedman. Hi, welcome to another episode of the Ideas Podcast. With me today, all the way from Colorado in the US, rapidly, as I've already said today, becoming my kind of state of instructional design over in America. It's Natalie Friedman. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's hear a little bit about you. What have you been doing? Where have you come from in terms of instructional design?
So I started doing basically professional development with teachers. So teaching other teachers how to do things, teaching other teachers how to be a little bit more innovative in their classrooms, how to use technology in their classrooms instead of just your standard book and PowerPoint. And again, just, that became really kind of a focus for me. Became very interesting for me, and I was really fortunate. I applied for a facilitator job with the state of Colorado and was hired as a facilitator, which really is just teaching adults. Ended up never actually facilitating. Once they saw what skills I had with technology, they said, oh, wait a second. Maybe we should have you making these web-based trainings and improving the training that we have. And so that is what I do. And that was about 3 years ago. And so I am an instructional designer for the state of Colorado, morphed from my education background into that. So there's the very, very short elevator pitch of what I've done.
There's so much there. And I think this is what I was saying, there's so much to talk about in today's episode, is that there's a couple of elements that, it's almost, at the minute, we're almost, I don't know, we can't move for articles and posts about teachers are flocking from teaching into instructional design as if it's some fantastic new phenomenon that's occurred in the last 12 months, which it isn't. It hasn't ever been. But I think this is possibly a good opportunity to maybe find out why, if that's all right. But also, before we get to that point, that is a class that you used to teach as a teacher that we do not have in the UK.
Oh, really?
Like that's the kind, like Photoshop and Premiere. You would not do that before leaving secondary education and moving into a college where you would do your A levels before going to university.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's all. I wish I had that.
I've completely thrown Tom off. He's like, wait a minute. I could be in the US doing that as like a 14-year-old.
This is it. It was interesting because I always kind of felt it was something that was missed. Because once people got to college, they would suddenly find this whole new element of what they were interested in. So for me, for instance, during secondary education, it was music and drama and theatre. But what I really loved was the technology within those aspects. But there was no option to study that. If you wanted to study music, you needed to play an instrument. That was your choice. If you wanted to do something in the theatre, you needed to act. That was your choice. You got to college and all of a sudden it was, you can study lighting and sound design, you can study recording techniques, all these kinds of things. It's so interesting that you have that at an earlier age. I wonder how much of a difference that makes when you look at the size of the creative arts space in, obviously the US is a bigger country, so there's always going to be a discrepancy, but I do wonder if that's part of the reason that earlier age education is why, generally speaking, like UK artists have made it when they go to America, not the other way around.
I mean, that is sort of an interesting way to look at it, right? And I don't think that what I do or what I did is all that unusual throughout the US. I'm sure that in smaller towns where they don't have the same amount of funding, it would be slightly different. But I think it's pretty standard middle school, high school, and things like drama. We had that in our middle school, and those kids learned set design, and they could focus on the lighting and the set design or sound if that's what they wanted to do, as opposed to being the actual actor on the stage. And that was a whole separate class, separate from what I taught. I did
Interesting.
teach, like, GarageBand and Audacity kinds of things, like how they could do sound mixing, and,
Mm,
that was really nice for it. It's just such a great outlet for the kids to know that that's an option for them.
yeah.
They can have that. It doesn't have to be painting. You don't have to if you're an artist, it doesn't mean you're painting or sculpting. You can be an artist in a digital sense too.
Yeah,
And you really reach a
absolutely.
lot of kids by having that option.
Yeah. I just wonder how many people that there was always this thing around for like I studied drama, but I was not I did well in the course, but I would not be a good actor. I'm not an extroverted person. I would struggle with that aspect of it. It was a painful process for me because what I was interested in was setting the stage and how lighting can set a mood and completely change how a scene is perceived.
Mhm.
So for me, it was 2 years of look, just do the course, do the course. Then when you're finished here, you can go and get on a course you actually want to do because you'll have
Mhm.
reached that level of education. I wonder
Right.
how many people don't make it through those 2 years or however many years it is to get to that point and they lose
Right.
that passion or that love for something. And obviously this example's drama, but I wonder how many other subjects in
Mhm.
terms of
Mhm.
education and learning
Mhm.
by not giving people the ability to specialize into, so you're interested in maths, yes, well, not all maths. Like no, when people go they've become a famous mathematician, chances are they weren't famous for all types of math. There's a huge amount of maths out there.
Right.
You know,
Right.
you speak, it's same with scientists. No one is just a famous scientist. They're a
Scientist.
physicist or an astrophysicist
Mhm.
or an astrophysicist specializing in black holes. It's incredibly specialized. um I wonder how. Yeah, that's probably a bit too big a topic to discuss on this show, but I do
I
wonder how many
think it's
people
a
we
big topic,
lose.
that's true.
Yeah, how many people we lose for not allowing that specialization in learning. Um,
Mhm.
hmm,
Mhm.
that's a deeper conversation than this show usually deals with. So we'll move on and not attempt to
Okay.
answer it.
Alright. And I don't think I have answers to that. And
No,
notice that I left education, so I don't know. Yeah.
that's it, and that's why I'll never be going there. So again, moving on from that, I mean, as I said, we kind of we hear a lot about that the shift from teaching to
Mhm.
ID at the moment. For
Mhm.
you, what was the kind of leading reason for that, if you don't mind talking about it?
Oh, yeah. No, I don't mind talking about that at all, and it's interesting. I think that, so in the last few months, I've actually connected with quite a few people who either are leaving teaching or have recently left. And again, because I did this, 3.5 years ago, it's a little bit different story, but I do tend to hear kind of the same thing, and that is you're a teacher and there's nowhere else to go in terms of can you advance in your career. So unless you want to be a principal, an assistant principal, and I'm not sure if it's the same term in the UK, but the person that's running the school and doing all
Yeah,
the discipline, if you don't want to do that, you run into a wall. Are there some other positions that you can do in a school district? Absolutely. Here's the problem. What I really wanted to do, professional development, basically be a learning and development person in a school district. I wanted to do something like
mm,
that. I thought that would be perfect for me. There's usually a team of like two people that do that, even in a huge school district. So there's
right.
virtually no opportunity to move into that. So the opportunities just weren't there. I didn't have the option to advance, and I wanted to do something different, but also have the option to, oh, if I wanted to move into management, how do you do that if you're working in a school? But you can do that in the private sector, or in my case, working for a state or government agency.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I think it is very similar here. We kind of have head teachers instead of principals, but it's exactly
Hmm.
the same idea. So yeah, I think that's probably going to be something that's fairly echoed because I mean certainly in terms of professional development here, I speak to a lot of teachers and it seems to be something that they kind of just expected to do that role from the good of their hearts whilst also being a full-time teacher.
Oh, yeah.
Why would you not just want to give away your time for free? After all, your job's amazing. It must be so rewarding to have
Mhm.
children around you all the time, because everyone
All
knows
the
how
time.
lovely children are.
They're great. My own children are perfect, but yes, no.
Of course, yeah.
Of course they are. No, but that's absolutely true. If you show yourself as someone who not only is a skilled teacher, but is also good at facilitating learning for other adults, then it's oh, you were really good at explaining how to do that really cool thing in Google Slides. Can you do a training for that? How about you do a training for that after school one day? And then it sort of keeps rolling and rolling and rolling into suddenly you're the person that's always doing that.
And somehow the words "How about you pay me" just never quite work into the
That's so funny.
conversation.
No, no,
Oh
that
dear.
doesn't happen. Yeah.
Oh, that's
But
no good.
it was not because of the pay that I left education. I think there is probably there is a misunderstanding. I'm sure that there are people that are leaving education because they don't like the pay.
Yeah.
That it depends on the state and your school district and all of that stuff.
And that's the same in all jobs, right? There are
Mhm.
people who leave corporate ID jobs because they're not happy with the pay.
Sure.
It's
Sure.
it's just the way it is.
Mhm.
But I have always wondered, because I kind of thought the teachers that I've had, and I stayed in touch with quite a few more recently as I've got into learning and development and kind of gone back and gone, oh, what are you up to at the moment? Who are people who I thought were quite good. And they don't seem to have left, but others do. I think there has been a lot of the teachers that have come in have maybe stepped in and gone, this job isn't for me. And then when you speak to them initially, they talk about money and they talk about hours.
Mm.
And then later on, they talk about the things you're talking about. A little bit later, when they've had a chance to think, and they think, actually, am I on a little bit more money? Some yes, some no. But actually, what's it about? And a lot of it is to do with progression and opportunity.
Mhm.
And recognition seems to be a big thing as well. Like there seems to be, in terms of the professional skill, there seems to be more of a thing in terms of instructional designer versus teacher. Which has always slightly confused me, because not all teachers do everything instructional designers do and vice versa, but the roles are not that unbelievably different.
There are definitely similarities and there are definitely differences for sure. And you'll probably ask me some questions about that. But right, I think that, in the US, it's pretty typical in the first 3 years of teaching that someone kind of decides, am I going to stick with this or not? That's pretty typical. And a lot of people leave teaching after about 3 years because their idea of what teaching is going to be isn't really quite what it ends up being. Or they just decide, I'd like to do something with, in this same area, but a little bit different. And some people just leave completely and do something totally different.
And again, I don't think that's too dissimilar to a lot of jobs, is it? 3 years is a pretty light thing. I don't think I've ever had one job for more than 3 years.
I tend to do the same kind of, I mean,
3
I
years is
taught
a
for
long
a long
time.
time. Yeah, 3 years is a long time when you think about, how much you can learn, and then you decide, oh, I'd like to do something slightly different. I mean, I was a teacher for many years, but taught different things. I did teach when I was teaching design. It was for 3 years, and then decided I need to move on. I'll do something else.
That's it. And I guess, as you were saying, there comes a point where that, even if it's a 3-year cycle, those 3-year cycles lead up to a point where, like, right now I need something else, please. And there is no next thing. Whereas I suppose in the broader world, there is always a next thing.
There's always something else. Yeah.
So,
Always.
I know we sort of touched on it very briefly there, so I guess it would be really interesting. I think I hear a lot about the differences between teaching versus instructional design and educating versus training. It'd be really interesting to hear from you some of the similarities.
So let me think for a moment about the similar. I actually made a couple of notes. I may peek over at my notes for a moment. See.
Go for it. You're more organized than me.
Well, I'm just one of those people, I like to keep, a lot of notes. Oh, I know one of the things that is very similar that stretches across education and into instructional design, depending on where you work and what kind of instructional designer you are. If you do something similar to what I do, the data collection and evaluation, you're doing that in both places. So as a teacher, of course, you need to collect data on how your students are doing, evaluate how they're doing if your teaching is effective. I have to do the same thing with the things that I create now. And I understand that not every instructional designer has to do that. But in my role, we do have to do that. We kind of are the one-stop shop and do everything.
And just my 2 cents, every instructional designer
Mhm.
should be required to do that, because otherwise how do you know what you're doing is actually having an impact? And if you don't
Exactly.
want to do it, maybe ask yourself why you don't want to know whether or not your work is having an impact.
Yes, and are you effective? Yes, exactly. And is your evaluation effect like are you just doing like a Kirkpatrick level 1 of just, "Oh, did you enjoy my course?" Or are you actually getting data for did people learn something? And that's where it's very similar to education.
Yeah. This
Um,
is it's funny you mentioned that. The number of surveys I got back saying, "Oh, Tom was so friendly. He clearly loves facilitating
yes.
sessions." Like Tom hates facilitating sessions. Tom loathed the fact that you were in that room with him for 3 hours. He wanted nothing more than to get back to fixing a storyline issue. Trust
Yeah,
me.
exactly.
That's
Exactly, right? Like you're thinking about, "Oh my gosh, why can't I get that trigger to work?" Ah.
yes.
Yeah,
But thank you
exactly.
for reaffirming my acting skills. Thank you very much. That's
Yes,
but
exactly. "Oh, look, I did so well at
yeah,
that."
but not exactly a useful bit of data really. So that's interesting. Um, so I guess yeah,
Another
go for it.
well, I was just gonna say another thing that is incredibly valuable in both realms is the building of relationships.
Hmm.
As a teacher, you have to build relationships with your coworkers, with the parents, and obviously with the kids. And in my role, building relationships is everything because I have to figure out I have to get to know the SMEs or the people that are the subject matter expert to figure out what it is they really want. And I have to build that relationship to be able to really do like some analysis of what they're really trying to do. Is training really needed? And you have to have that relationship. You can't just go in there to someone you don't know, have no relationship with, say, what you're trying to do here, you don't need training for this. You're going about this completely the wrong way. You have to have built the relationship first to address that. So that's very similar too.
Yeah, no, that again, that's a it almost seems obvious, but it is really interesting.
Hmm.
I think largely because I know that's the part of becoming an instruction designer I struggled most with.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
because I shocked Tom's not a people person. Everyone who knows me is just falling off their chairs in shock. Um,
No, it's not
so,
possible.
but no, but I think it is often an overlooked element because often when people are talking about what do you need to become an instructional designer, you
Mhm.
get a list full of technical requirements,
Yes.
theoretical understandings. You need to have a portfolio. You need to
Mhm.
have some level of graphic design skills, and
Right.
all these things are to an extent true,
Mhm.
but they all somewhat miss that at some point you're going to have to speak to someone and find out what you need to do.
Mhm.
And if you
Yeah.
can't do that, none of those other skills are even slightly useful, because all you're going to do is
Right.
create a PowerPoint presentation that doesn't do much. Um,
Right. Or you completely miss the mark of what training actually was supposed to be
yeah,
because you're so focused on, not listening, not having the communication skills, but that you're a great graphic designer. That's great. But you've got to be able to talk to people and say things in a way where you'll get the information that you need.
yeah,
That's really
absolutely.
important in what we do.
100%. And the number of really beautiful, very clever courses out there that
Mhm.
achieve very little, um, kind of highlight that issue. And I
Mhm.
know that in sort of my early years of instructional design, I was guilty of creating very technically clever things and then
Mhm.
launching them and going, why has nothing improved? And then someone would go, have you spoken to your audience? And
Exactly.
I was very lucky to have people around me to say, go and speak to people. And eventually it's like, oh, it turns out these people, they kind of know what they need to do. And we
Mhm.
just need to listen to them and
Mhm.
help them do it. Shock.
Mhm.
It's a stupidly complicated formula that.
We
But
overcomplicate it for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's because if you sign up to a course or you go to find out how to become an instructional designer, top of the list, especially at the minute, is going to be you need
Mhm.
a portfolio and you're going to need to have a storyline license. So here's how to use storyline and here's how to find some graphic design skills and great, you're now an instructional designer. Um, which is fine until someone says, "Could you create some learning objectives for me?" And you go, "What?
Huh?
Triggers? I can do triggers."
Right,
Um,
exactly. Look at this fabulous layer. I have made this really interesting interactivity, and I know XAPI. I mean, that's great. But
Again, I'm not in any way saying technical skills are not useful. They're hugely useful,
you're,
but
you're,
yeah, only when
but
combined.
if you're looking at what is similar, or let's even reframe it. Why would a teacher make a good instructional designer?
Mm.
And a lot of the reason that a teacher could make a great instructional designer, and I personally am a bit biased, I'm sure, and I've been on some hiring committees over the past couple of years, and as soon as I see teacher, I'm like, we should talk to this person. I understand they might not have storyline, and they might not have that in their back pocket and be an expert, but let's talk to them because they will know how to communicate and get what information needs to be gleaned so that they can create a good training. But you have to have a little bit of both, obviously. You can't just walk in with I know how to talk to kids. Well, okay, great, but
It's slightly different there.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
You know that your kids are legally mandated to have to stay in the room. Yeah, adults not so much.
Yeah, exactly. And and anybody will tell you that teaching teachers is the hardest thing ever.
Yes, I discovered that this year. Uh, a
Oh,
freelancer getting the, we'd like you to help us move some of our content online. And I kind of thought, this will be
oh,
amazing working with teachers. So could you just run a couple of sessions to help our teachers understand how to deliver online? Not a massively
mm,
receptive group to being told how to teach a class. But at the same time, I do get that.
it's a struggle.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's that was interesting. But
Hmm.
at the same time, I think I'd agree with you
Hmm.
there. Because I work with a lot of kind of people that I pull on for like individual contracts or certain projects and things like that. And whenever
Hmm.
we're building a team, I worked with a lot of people that kind of go, look, I know storyline in a roundabout kind of way. I'm not great at it, but look, my history is learning. I
Hmm.
can I can really get to the crux of an issue. I can build learning objectives and content that's really going to help deliver change, but
Hmm.
I'm not going to be your person when a SCORM file starts doing something weird. Actually, that person, I would 9 times out of 10 argue, is more valuable and harder to find in the industry at the moment. Because ultimately, learning storyline is not, it's not a Herculean task. It's PowerPoint plus 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 to a certain extent. It can do some cool stuff. How much of it is
Hmm.
actually necessary to create effective learning? Again, there's a lot in the air there.
Right, right. And I'm sure there will be people listening that say, "Well, wait a second. I mean, like, I'm super skilled, and I'm sure you're very skilled in storyline. I, I feel like I am at this point pretty skilled in storyline. I see the benefit in knowing it, but can you hire someone that has a basic level of storyline, that has a really good rapport with people, or really understands content? Absolutely. I think it's a very useful thing to look at for what someone can do.
It certainly provides great balance to a team
Hmm.
and means that
Hmm.
in my case, for instance, I don't have to speak to too many people, which is great. Um,
Exactly. Send the former teachers in to go talk to people, and it'll be fine.
and I can save my energy for important things like internet shows. Um,
Exactly. Exactly. No, that's
yeah,
exactly
that's
it.
it. So no, that was really interesting. So moving on from the similarities, then I
Hmm.
guess what are the big differences?
Hmm. Yeah. I think that, and I don't know for sure for educators that come into instructional design, but let's say if you were to do exactly what I did. So you go from teaching in front of kids to being an instructional designer for the state of Colorado. I, in general, do not facilitate any classes. Have I done a few over the past couple of years? Yes, and I'm actually going to be facilitating a class coming up here in a couple of weeks because I'm helping out and taking over something. But in general, over the past couple of years, I haven't facilitated anything. So you move from having that interaction with real people to your interaction with real people is the SMEs or the subject matter people or people that know the
Mm.
content. And then you need to take that time and do the technical part. And how do you create that so that people can interact with something on their own, asynchronous, and learn. So that's very different.
Yeah,
And
that's
that could be a struggle for some people depending on what they think instructional design is and what it actually is.
oh, that's almost verging on another deep philosophical. What is instructional
Right.
design? I feel like I need to be holding up a skull
And
over here or something. That's
exactly right. What?
but no,
Looking at
that's interesting
you're the actor,
because
not me, but yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
but I kind of had something a little bit different. It wasn't from teaching, so I worked
Mhm.
with a bunch of trainers, which was my first role in kind of learning and development. But I was a trainer who didn't train very much and instead did storyline. Because
Mhm.
that's just how that world
Mhm.
works. Sometimes you've got
Right.
12 people with the job title trainer, every one of them doing something entirely different for their job.
Mhm.
Um,
Exactly.
and we had one trainer who was an I can only tell him as an expert facilitator. Like you sat into one of his rooms and it was like a masterclass in how to facilitate
Mhm.
training. Really
Mhm.
great,
Mhm.
effective, but also enjoyable and funny, but not to the point where it detracted from content. He walked that line. He's years of experience.
Right.
Then he had to create content where he couldn't read his audience
Yep.
and he couldn't adapt
Yep.
and change, and it didn't have that same impact. um, and he really struggled with that transition. Is that kind of similar to what you think could or might happen with the teachers coming
Yeah,
over?
that's exactly what I was thinking about. Very similar to that. That there are people that just that interaction with students or with people receiving your training. So it could be adults. It doesn't have to be children, but
Mm,
there are people that really thrive in that environment, and they're just at their best when they're in front of a group of people, and that's great. That is a fabulous skill.
yeah,
A lot of us that came from teaching have some of that, but maybe that wasn't our very best skill. It's okay.
yeah,
But if that is your thing, that's what really fills your bucket, and you think instructional design is going to do that for you, it may not. But
mm,
it depends. But again, it depends on where you end up and what you end up getting hired to do. There are lots of instructional designers, I'm sure, that are creating content and then delivering things
yeah.
virtually now, but probably in person at some point.
Absolutely. I think I know there are a lot of instructional
Mhm.
designers, myself included, that still write a lot of content as an instructional designer that is designed to go and be facilitated by someone. So I think that
Right.
skill set is going to
Right.
be forever needed. We're never going to
Oh
be
yeah.
I hope we're never going to be a 100% digital learning environment. It just doesn't, I don't know. There's still something a little bit special about walking into a room of people. Um,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
there's just some topics where I've yet to see things delivered as well digitally as they can be in person. For,
Absolutely.
I will always remember the fire safety courses where I had to go and put out a fire with a fire extinguisher. You can't do that online. There's no way to get that same experience of this is what a fire extinguisher sounds like. This is what it feels like going
This
off
is
in
what a
your
fire
hand.
smells like.
Yeah,
Right. Right.
this is what being close to a large
Mhm.
amount of fire is like. I know there's kind of a lot about VR. And in every show we touch on VR, and I go, I will not
Yeah.
start a rant about my hatred of VR at the moment. Not so much my hatred of the technology, just my hatred of how L&D is treating it as the next coming of the new world of L&D, and it's just not at the moment.
Right.
But that's at some point I must do a video on that. But I think
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
meantime, I think facilitation will always have a place,
Mhm,
which is
mhm.
nice. I think it would be sad to see it leave the learning world completely, and hopefully it won't. But
No, it won't. Even for adults. I mean, I think everyone sees that for children, how very important it is for them to be back in schools. I mean, I think
yeah,
that's pretty solid. But if you talk to people that are facilitators in general, people that facilitate training that have been doing it from their kitchen table for the last year,
it's not.
they want desperately to be back in front of people.
Yeah,
Most of them, I think.
yeah. And I think most people, even those who maybe don't count themselves as people, this year especially have kind
Exactly.
of gone, that was valuable. There was more to that than I thought there was at the time.
Hmm.
Maybe I don't
Hmm.
want to sit in 3 hour meetings every day, but just every
Right.
now and then, it's
Yeah,
nice
let's
to
find
see
a
people.
balance. Can we find
It's
a balance? Like all of us don't want to have to deal with traffic and going into big meetings and stuff. Right, right.
absolutely.
The, there's another difference I'll bring up too from
Go for it.
education to moving into instructional design. And again, it's always going to depend on who you work for and where you're working and what kind of timelines you have and all those things. But I will say, so as a teacher, you're teaching, and then if you want to do extra things like being an instructor or a facilitator for the other members of your staff or other people in the school district, uh, you have really tight timelines and very little time to work on that. I have
Mm,
found that's what's very different. I have more time to work on things because as an instructional designer, that's my role. My 8 hours a day are spent working in storyline. There's actually time in my day built into my day to learn new things.
yeah.
That's expected of me. And that's very different from teaching.
Yeah, so that's again. I think that it's an interesting topic because it's something that I think different people have experienced very differently. In
Hmm.
terms of
Hmm.
time actually baked in to develop and grow and get good at what you do. And there's a few
Hmm.
aspects of it because obviously there's the more formal kind of professional development time where you might be allocated an
Hmm.
actual budget of time and potentially even
Hmm.
money to invest in your development. But there's also that just
Right.
kind of day to day allowance for things take time because sometimes you have to learn as you go. Which, of course, in a teaching role, if there are kids in the room, you don't really have that time baked in. You can't extend the lesson by half an hour because you needed to get things rolling at the start. Um,
Exactly.
so,
Everybody hold on. I have to go look this up. I mean, like you can do that to a certain extent, but it's not quite the same.
yeah, absolutely. So I guess in your role now, I mean,
Mhm.
how do you find the allowance you get for your own development?
Mhm. And, we're in a tough spot in terms of the financial allowance.
Hmm.
We're in a tough spot. So, again, I work for the state. And so that, of course, in the last year, in general, if you work for the government in the United States, you're going to make less money than private industry. I'll tell you that right now for sure. And you will probably not get the perks that you would have with private industry, corporate world, being able to go to all the conferences that you would like to go to. There are other great advantages, though. To working in government. But right now, I have the ability to take time in my day to do any, LinkedIn learning or perform some of the challenges, the e-learning heroes and
Yeah.
and do those challenges to learn some new skills. Um, so it's not so much the financial support as much as I have time. And it's expected and okay to take time to do those things.
And you see, I've always kind of been on the side of that's in the long term for your own actual development. That's more valuable.
Mhm.
That's the actual, I don't say the useful learning. All learning's useful to a point,
Right.
but
Right.
I don't know. There are a lot of people with letters after their name who've completed a course about learning styles. Um,
Mhm.
that's just as an
Right.
example. This is my long term gripe.
Yes.
In here in the UK, it's the CIPD is the big recognition. I think over in the States, maybe you've got like ATD and a couple of ATD. In fairness, I think
Yep.
is a good way ahead. They've at least kind of gone, oh, we should actually look at real science, not just fairy tales. But
Yes.
there's we're a little bit behind in the UK. Bowler hats and stiff upper lip and Spitfires and all that kind of thing. Still wishing it was the 1950s here. But um, I don't know. There a lot of money seems to get spent by a lot of organisations to get those accreditations for their people, and rather than actually making their people better at what they do, um, which I don't know. It's always felt a bit counterproductive. Whereas what you're describing seems more to me that it's just a case of I don't know, just almost it's almost more a culture of self development rather
Mhm.
than a here's a budget, do spend it by the end of the year, otherwise we'll have it back. It,
Right, and we certainly have some of that as well,
of course.
especially, again, being government, you have your time frame that you
Oh
have to
yeah.
spend your money, but I do feel like and I have been very fortunate in the I've worked for 3 separate departments within the state. I've felt very fortunate that there's a lot of cultural support. I think that's a great way to explain it. That the culture is that if you've got some time in your day, spend that learning some new stuff. Spend that time learning a cool new skill that you can then bring back to the team and share that. The past team that I was on, we did Innovation Fridays. And so we would share once a month some cool stuff that we learned how to do.
That's
Just share
really
that with the
cool.
team. Hmm.
Because I mean,
Hmm. And
that's almost
I'm
like
going to bring that to my new team, by the way. I just haven't yet.
yeah.
I'm in a new role, so I haven't brought that in yet.
Ooh. Because that's
Yes.
almost like a Google-esque way of doing things.
Mhm.
Because they always used to say it's like one day a month, everyone just works on their own project, whatever you want. But if it turns into a multi-million-pound thing, the business owns it 'cause it's our time. But other
Right.
than that,
Exactly.
kind of work on what you want because they wanted their people to be kind of curious and learning and developing, and you never know when you're going to learn something that 6 months later you go, I can solve that problem because of this.
Exactly.
It's it's
And
that kind
that
of
is that's exactly what we did, and that is exactly the culture that was built by my last supervisor for sure, and I have the same kind of culture with this new team, and just approaching things as obviously there are going to be times in your day where you are just head down. Last week I had an Excel spreadsheet thing I had to work on. That's not ID stuff, but I had to. There was a thing I had to do. Head down working on the Excel spreadsheet. But then, oh, okay, what other cool skills can I bring to my team because I got a little bit of break, or I need to do something that's a little more creative. So I'm going to turn this way and focus on this for a little bit and bring that
yeah.
back to the team.
Yeah, I think that's again to my mind a lot more valuable than
Mhm.
even the biggest development budgets where you go to every conference and get all the free notebooks and cuddly toys, which seems to be the mainstay of going to an L&D conference, certainly in the UK. I don't know. That's what I've missed this year. I'm going to have to buy my own stationery, and I'm very disappointed.
I know. I don't have
Um,
all the sticky notes and what is it, the little like squeezy toys that you get and
I know, right?
pop sockets and yeah,
It's terrible.
I
Notebooks and
know.
everything.
Yeah.
Pens. I never realised how many pens I go through in a year until I've actually had to buy them myself. It's terrible.
Exactly. You would
But
get those at a conference.
but next year, just wait. I'll be there. If it's not nailed down, I'll be having it. It's fine.
Yeah, I was gonna say, can you imagine what next year's gonna be like? Like starting in the fall for what conferences are everybody's gonna be just crazy trying to go to every conference in-person thing they can go to.
Yeah,
Just because they've missed seeing people.
I don't know. Part of me's in two minds because I always used to moan about conferences. I'd go to them and come back and gone, I know nothing now that I did not know before. Um,
I
and
have
it's
nothing to
interesting.
provide.
This is it. The online ones this year I've found have been the most informative conferences I've ever been to because they've had different people speaking. It's not been the same like six voices doing the same talk they've done for the past 3 years at every
Mhm.
conference.
Mhm.
I've heard from people who haven't got 30 years of experience, they've got 5 years of experience, but they've done this really cool thing and they want to talk about it. And they would never, ever get time to speak at a major in-person conference because of the
Mhm.
cost. They would have to pay £3,000-4,000 in the UK to speak at a major conference, but because it's online, it costs nothing, and so they
And they
spoke.
can yeah, exactly. I
And
I
that's
totally agree, yeah. We were able to attend, I think what was it, the Adobe I can't remember, was it Adobe
oh
Max? Is that
the
what that
yes, that was I thought that was brilliant.
fantastic. I learned
It's
so much, and there's no way my entire team would have been able to go to that with our budget. There's no chance. But we were able to all attend it virtually, and it was great. We all learned great stuff.
This is it. And you've got that. You've got like TLDC is
Mhm,
another group in the States, has held
mhm,
like, I want to say two, possibly even three online conferences in the past year. And they've all been amazing.
mhm.
And some of them, there have been speakers who have like, I got into L&D 6 months ago. Here's what I'm seeing, and here's what I think we could all do to improve. It's like, wow, that is the voice. That is what we need. That is what people who have been here for a while need. That external view that you never get at these
Mhm.
events, because it becomes a sounding board for, well, I'm a thought leader. Ugh, in this space, and you will all agree with me. Otherwise, you're not in my gang.
Right.
And that's what those events become. But these online ones, I don't know. They seem to have really engaged a different audience,
Mhm.
which is nice. I don't know. I feel like I've got more value out of them and not had to pay for many of them, versus traveling all over the country and paying insane money to go and stand in an exhibition hall and be told why I need to buy a new LMS. Um,
Look at how much better our LMS is than that LMS. See?
does
You should be using this.
Yeah. Does it host the content? Yeah, great. Um,
Cool.
99% of clients, that's what they want. Is the reality of it, unfortunately.
I know.
That's
I know. Or they don't. Well, LMS is probably an entire whole other show you could do. You could do many on. Do you even know what you're looking for in an LMS? Because I probably think you don't. You don't even know what questions to ask for what you want in an LMS yet.
this is it. You can tell that by how everyone needs XAPI integration,
Hmm.
and yet
Hmm.
none of them can quite tell you what it is, but they know they need it. Um,
But I need that. I need to be able to do it. Tell me what
absolutely.
it is. I don't know, but I know it'll do great things.
And hey, I'm an evil freelancer. I'll just sell it to you at a huge markup. It's not a problem. You can.
Exactly. Totally fine. I can totally do that.
No, I don't do that. If there's a client watching, that's not how I work.
Mm-mm. No,
Honest,
he
maybe.
told me that is not what he does.
Absolutely not. No. So yeah, I think there was one thing that I thought was really interesting. I sort of spoke to you about before we started, about the fact that you work for the state of Colorado.
Hmm.
And it's kind of equally an ID perspective and a kind of cultural question, I guess, because it's very different here in the UK. We don't kind of have such a big split between federal and local and state governments. We just kind of have the government, and then your local council who decide when your bins get collected, and maybe occasionally tarmac a road. That's about it. Um, and broadly speaking, you were saying, for instance, if you work for the state, you tend to get not necessarily lower wages, but not as much as you might in the private sector, and not all the benefits. We almost
Definitely lower
see.
wages. Definitely
Fair
lower. I
enough.
mean, if anyone here is listening, there in the private sector, and they're like, I like the security of the idea of working for the government. I should do that. You will take a pay cut. I'm telling you. However, there are other good things, so keep going.
That's it. We almost see the reverse of that. So we have, well, we have what is quite an archaic governmental system. If you work in the government, you get paid quite a lot of money. You get very well looked after. You become a
Hmm.
civil servant, as we call it,
Hmm.
and therefore you get a very generous pension, a very generous salary. You're very well looked after within an expenses system. It's a nice little bubble. That's why we all hate them, with a burning passion that would blot out the sun. Um, but um, a couple of people that I've spoken to who have worked there or have contracted into that space have kind of made the comment that what they're able to do is very, very, very restricted. Everything is done through the moniker of policy and government and politics, almost getting in the way of learning design at times. Um, the one person I spoke to specifically was talking about content around kind of green workplaces and environmental
Hmm.
friendliness and all that kind of thing. But
Hmm.
lots of other people have said it as well. I just wondered, what are the kind of differences you see? I suppose, I guess, because you went straight into ID working for the state, it's a bit of a
Hmm.
kind of, I don't know, maybe. But do you ever come up against anything like that?
So, one thing I'll say, right, we definitely don't, getting to the financial part, we definitely don't make as much as private sector, but there are a lot of great advantages. So I don't want to discount how
No, no, no.
fantastic it is. But um, I have not, in my experience, found that there are a lot of limitations, with the exception of there are certainly a lot of rules around what you can show, because we have a
Mm,
lot of systems and private information.
yeah,
So there's a lot of like blurring of things out, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of policy stuff. It's very
yeah.
policy heavy when you work for the government. My last position was very much policy heavy for medical care, which I understand your medical coverage in your country far and above what we have here. So it's probably a very different like
So,
concept
yeah.
from what the UK's got. But there was a lot of medical stuff that I dealt with, and also what you might know as food stamps. It's called
Okay.
SNAP now, but so I dealt with a lot of that, and so a lot of very policy heavy stuff, which became kind of like what we were talking about before we started recording about people feel like that's everybody needs to know every single little bit about
Mm.
this policy. Well, in actuality, most of the time you don't. You don't need to know all of that. But if that's the world you live in, so I think that kind of restriction, like you have that issue of trying to get the actual information from your subject matter people when they're just totally focused on the policy stuff. But what I
Okay.
do now yeah, what I do now doesn't have to deal with policy really at all, and is much more about how to get people to be better leaders, or how to help their employees have better performance and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of freedom. So, and that's my realm now.
That's interesting because those are in that regard, that's not so different to any other corporate gig in terms of the content,
Mm-mm.
in terms of the
Right,
topics, the fact that it's
right.
still at its kind of
Hmm.
core, it's still people.
Hmm.
That's
Right. Um, I don't think that what I did in my last position would have been any different than if I worked for a private insurance company in the United
mm,
States. Like there would be the same kinds of policy rules and things. So, um, yeah, I
that's
think I think
fascinating.
there's a lot of advantage to having this kind of freedom with content that we have.
Yeah, and I suppose as well there's that kind of constant here we have an issue with the revolving door of kind of private public employees. And a big part of
Mm,
that is because there's no investment in people. It's
mhm,
easier just to
mhm,
hire an expert in the field. And so maybe we lack that element. Whereas by the sounds of it, for you, you're almost working on stopping that to an extent because you if people are going to become better leaders or become better project managers or whatever skill they're developing, there's
mhm.
less of a need for that kind of in and out within the organization.
Exactly. I mean, building a good culture, I mean, that is such an important part, no matter where you work.
Mm.
Having a good culture is so important, and having that psychological safety and feeling good about where you're working, and all of those things are so very important. And that's kind of baked into some of what I'm getting to work on now, which is great.
So we're coming up on the hour very quickly, which is kind of scary. But I'll just on that point then, I thought it'd be really interesting because this is a debate I've been having with a few people at the moment. In terms of building a workplace culture,
Mhm.
does L&D have a leading role in that, a supporting role in it, or yeah, what do you think about that?
That's interesting. I my initial thought is we have a supporting role because we can support all the different various teams and departments throughout wherever you're working. But
Yeah,
it's important that your particular L&D team has a good culture before you can start telling other people how to have a, this is how you guys should run your
yeah,
department,
yeah.
but we're all messed up over here.
Eh, don't do this. Don't do any of this.
Don't do what we're doing.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to recognize it. I mean, I think as L&D professionals, we're automatically curious and creative and interested in how people learn. So it becomes second nature on some level that we want to be better. And maybe that also means we want our teams to be better or our small group that we're working with to be better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really it's a different answer to what I've kind of been throwing backwards and forwards of people, but I think it's a really solid answer. And there's been this big thing about L&D should be leading the way in terms of setting culture within business, and it kind of worries me a little bit because that's
Hmm.
not L&D's job.
Hmm.
And if we start doing that, what are we not doing that we should be to make time for it?
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
if you're kind of busy going, oh yeah, great, we're setting the culture, great, no one can do their job.
Right.
Um,
All we're doing is working on the culture.
yeah, there's this kind of issue of, yeah, I like the idea of L&D leading this big business change, but I just don't think it's its place, or practical in 99% of situations. I can't think of many CEOs that go, oh well, if L&D say so, we had better get on it. You
Right.
know, they're probably going to go, excuse me, what? Get back in your box. That's
Right. Right. Exactly. Do you guys in the UK, are you using the term organizational development? Is that something that you have as part of your business structures?
kind of not very often. It's one of those. It's seen as you're a cool and hip business
Right.
if you're dealing with organizational development.
Right. So
That's
the team I'm on now is the organizational development and training team. And just like you said, 99% of what we do is training. I mean, creating
yeah.
training and L&D stuff. But we are organizational development as well. So it's a little bit of what we're kind of moving in that way of, again, how can we make leaders better? How can we help leaders guide their employees and their direct reports in a better way and keep people and get that retention of employees. So it's, at least for me, again, it's kind of wrapped up together. But I agree that in
Right.
general, L&D professionals should not be the ones that are saying, I know exactly how we should have this culture. Like that's not necessarily the
Well, because if we
best
do,
thing.
it's always going to be we need a learning culture. Which was it was the phrase that I hated for all of 2019. We're going to have a learning centered culture, really, because that's not what this business does. This business sells stuff, so I'm pretty certain if we're going to stay in business, we need a sales centered culture. Um,
Exactly. Because
sorry,
you're looking at revenue.
but this is it. It's yeah. If ever there was a reason for to never let L&D totally steer a business's culture, it would be that. Is every one of us would say it should be learning centric because learning's
Right.
great and learning is great. Learning empowers people. Learning opens up possibilities.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, learning does not generate a lot of money. Um,
That's true.
this is
That is true.
this is the sad thing is that I run a learning design company. Our culture is not learning focused, it is money focused because money is how I pay people, and how
Exactly.
I pay my landlord and pay for food and things like that. And so that's where the culture lies, unfortunately.
Yes.
You want a
That's a
learning
very good
culture,
point.
I guess, become a lifelong student and just stay at university. People, I'm
Right.
sure you can do that. That's,
I think you could, but I don't know if it's a good idea.
no, it's certainly not a profitable idea,
No.
but that's the way of life, I suppose.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, but it's been so interesting, kind of hearing your views on these topics because I don't know. I've spoken to a few people on this show who have either are considering teaching to ID or ID to teaching in a couple of
Mhm.
situations, and it's very different. And I guess maybe part of that is because you've been in your ID role a little bit longer. They've all been doing it right now,
Right.
and
They're
they've
doing
all
it right now.
yeah,
Mhm.
it's all of the moment and it's big and it's sudden.
Yeah.
And hearing a kind of step back view is so interesting. And especially then working in the environment you're in now. So, again, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, yeah.
And really, just is there anything you'd like to finish off with? Any final thoughts for the? I used to say the L&D world, but then I realised that's quite a grandiose statement to make. That this is somehow going to reach the L&D world. Have you got any thoughts you would like me to think about when I watch this back tomorrow for editing?
Right. Any sage advice? I've spent this entire time very much enjoying my chat with you, and also thinking about what beers do I have in my fridge, because what should I have? Because I should have thought of that before. No, I think that I would finish up with that. If anyone out there is in education and they're thinking they might want to branch into L&D, do it. Start talking to some people and give it a try. Don't be afraid. That would be my advice. And what's the worst that happens? You don't like it? You could probably go back to teaching if you like. Give it a try.
I'm guessing there's no shortage of teachers, right? Or need for teachers. You're always going to need more teachers.
Yes, and certainly in the U.S. right now, there's going to be a need for teachers, but that's an entire other episode about what's happening in the teaching world right now. So, but give it a try. Nice. It's fun. Well, it's very fun and different.
That is, that's awesome advice. I think it is. It not only just now, but always. It's a great profession to be in. I think it's a very. No, we're quite a decent community of professionals, I like to think, more so than a lot of other industries. Certainly back in my days in sales, the sales community is not a generous and loving community of other professionals. They are a, we will stab you in the face if we can make a tenner off it kind of community.
Right. Right. No, the L&D community is very giving, and that is a really good point too. It's a great group of people. Everyone I've talked to, virtually or whatever, very, very understanding and giving and helpful. That's very true.
Well, there we are. The industry, everyone loves each other until we don't. Then we have a massive fight over a simple disagreement that could have been settled with a simple bit of reading. But never mind. Natalie, I just want to thank you again so much for coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure. For those of you who are watching on the Instructional Design Tips YouTube channel, contact details for me and Natalie will be in the description of this episode. Do get in touch. I won't be particularly happy to speak to you, but Natalie seems far more friendly than I am, so you might have more luck there. If you are, however, listening on the podcast versions on Spotify or Google Podcast or wherever you get your favourite podcasts, those details are available on the Anchor FM podcast site. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Ideas Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button before you go. If you'd like to appear in future episodes of the show, get in touch and we'll organise a chat.